Nobody in that bakery knew that the man dusted in flour used to run quality control on a factory floor the size of 2 football fields. For 11 years, Marcus Doyle had built his whole identity around one idea. The gap between close enough and correct was everything. He caught underbaked batches before dawn, sent back anything that wasn't right, and earned a reputation as the guy who never let a mistake slip through. What nobody knew was that underneath the hairnet and the clipboard, he'd once dreamed of owning a bakery with his own name on the window. He never said it out loud. A dream you don't speak can't be laughed at. The woman who ran his company, Vivian Cross, saw people as numbers on a spreadsheet, nothing more. Marcus had spent 3 years as a green line on her report, invisible in the way that reliable people often are. He assumed that loyalty counted for something. He was wrong. The call came at 4 a.m. His mother had collapsed. He rushed to her side, took 3 days to get her stable, and called the office the moment he could to explain. When he walked back in, Vivian had turned his return into a public spectacle, dragging him in front of the whole floor to announce that his absence had blown a critical deadline. He tried to explain. She cut him off. Everyone has a reason. Reasons don't run a company. He handed over his badge and walked out, a man with no career and no plan. Weeks of rejection followed. Word spreads fast in a small town, and the word on Marcus was that he'd walked away from a good job. Then, driving nowhere in particular, he passed a shuttered bakery on the bad end of town, windows papered over, a closing sign fading in the door. Something in him woke up. Buying it made no sense. His savings were thin, his mother's bills were mounting, and everyone who loved him would have called it reckless. He bought it anyway. The former owner, an old woman with flour permanently creased into her hands, told him plainly, "It's not a good investment, but it was a good bakery, and most people can't tell the difference." He told her he could. He confessed the whole gamble to his mother from her hospital bed, terrified she'd call him foolish. Instead, she asked one question. If it failed, could he live with having tried? "At least I'll have failed at my own thing," he told her, "not somebody else's." She told him to go build it. The first month nearly broke him. A dead thermostat, a leaking pipe, a door that scraped every time it opened, and a bank account bleeding out one repair at a time. He baked from 3 a.m. to midnight, slept in fragments, and fixed equipment with his bare hands because he couldn't afford anyone else's. The town's verdict on him hadn't changed. Some mornings he sold 6 loaves and heard nothing but silence. What saved him wasn't a strategy. It was the bread. He obsessed over every batch the way he used to obsess over factory quality checks, until strangers started coming back and bringing friends. Slowly, the whispers shifted. Then Vivian walked in. She didn't recognize the bakery or the man behind the counter, not until she looked up and saw him in an apron. "So, this is where people land when they can't hold a real job," she said, laughing the same thin laugh from that day on the factory floor. Marcus said nothing. He wrapped her order, wiped the counter, and let her walk out, still believing she'd witnessed his defeat. 11 days later, a food journalist named Theo Banks wandered in chasing a rumor. One bite in, he stopped talking. He'd spent 15 years hunting for bakers who couldn't be taught, and he'd just found one. He offered Marcus a spot on a nationally aired food segment. 4 days before filming, everything collapsed at once. His only working oven died, and his flour order was delayed indefinitely. Instead of panicking, Marcus adapted, sourcing a smaller, unfamiliar batch of flour from a nearer supplier and spending sleepless nights relearning his own recipes by feel until the substitute behaved exactly like the original. The old woman who'd sold him the shop showed up unasked and ran the counter so he could stay at the bench. When the crew arrived, the bakery smelled exactly the way he'd spent 2 months teaching it to smell. The segment aired. By morning, there was a line down the block. He sold out by 9 a.m., baked more, sold out again by noon. Vivian saw the broadcast by accident, alone in her apartment, and sat frozen as the camera named the man behind the counter. Not an employee, but the owner. She realized the green line she'd erased without a second thought had been carrying a whole life she never bothered to see. She came back one quiet morning, said his name, and apologized, not with excuses, but plainly, for firing him without listening and for laughing at a life she thought was ruined. He accepted it, but corrected her story. His success wasn't a gift from her cruelty. It was what happened after, because he refused to stay down. She listened, bought a loaf like everyone else, and left changed. Back at her company, she started actually reading the names behind the numbers. Marcus's mother recovered enough to keep her promise, to taste what he'd built. Standing in the bakery that had once been boarded shut, he understood that the door slammed on him hadn't ended his story. It had forced him to build the one door that was always meant to be his.